Good day, folks. It's DIY Guy 123 here today, bringing you another do-it-yourself video. We've got a 12-year-old stove. It's a glass top stove, and the symptoms were two. One burner didn't work, and the indicator light that indicates the stove is hot stayed on all the time, even when the stove was cool, like hasn't been used in hours, day even. So what's the problem? Well, one thing you got to know is when a burner is not working, usually it's the actual burner itself. And when the indicator light stays on that it's hot all the time, usually it's a sensor that's on the side of the burner. This is a really basic repair. You only need about 4 tools to do the whole job, and I'm going to walk you through it and how to diagnose what the problem is, and it's easy to change. So, first things first is you've got to get the top up. Like this, so you can work underneath it. So to disassemble this, to get this top up, you open the door, you remove the screws that are on basically they come out like this. They're a vertical screw, and they come out from underneath the top. They come down. Don't mess with the screws that hold this latch on. That can be just left alone, but they're basically under here, okay? So I've seen stoves that have 2, this one had 4. There can be a variety of numbers of screws that hold that on. So now that you've got the screws loose in the front, you should be able to lift the top up like this. Now it's not hinged. You can't just fold it vertical. It's got little clips that hold it in. And so there's a clip back here that holds it there, and the same thing on the other side. So to get it this way, you've got to lift up just a little bit, get your hands under it, and then wiggle back and forth. And you'll see these clips pop out. Now, if they just don't want to come out, these ones did, but if they don't, you can take the back off. I had this off for another reason, and you'll see the clips protruding through here and over there, and you could just push them through from the back. Anyway, now that this is free, you can pull it out a couple inches, and you see a bunch of wires back there. You don't want to stress those wires, and you see when I move this, those wires flex. So when you go to tip this up, keep an eye on those wires. You don't want to really pull too hard on them. And so this top will just lift up like this, right on those wires, and then you can put a stick to hold this up. Before you remove any burners, you should notice where these tabs protrude through and mark them with the Sharpie. Because if you take any of these out, there's so many positions I didn't realize till I was putting it back in. Where did the burner go? And I had to kind of look at the dirt ring on the bottom of the glass, and there's a little bit of a mark on the back side of this to kind of figure it out. And so there are letters that mark, you know, there's S for side, probably side burner, but I don't know what the S stands for. Anyway, my terminal went back in the S hole, but you should really just take a picture of all these or mark them with Sharpie before you remove any of these from the plate. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna get this burner out of here. Now the way to do that is to use a quarter-inch socket on an impact drill, or use a screwdriver and pull this screw out, pull this whole piece of metal away, and then you can work these clips out. You can see them from the other burners there. Work them out and then get this burner out of the way. Now, before you disconnect any wires, I always recommend people take a really good photograph, because you don't want to mix them up on the reverse process when you're putting it back together. Another thing to note is, even though it looks like this part can unscrew from there and it's separate from the burner, the sensor part is unlikely to be easily replaceable, because there's some kind of like a welded terminal between these two things. I'm not sure if you could solder it. Solder it may not hold up to the heat. I don't recommend trying to replace this separately from this. But anyway, so I undo my wires off of the burner side. Okay, so that's, you know, the 2 wires that go to the burner, because they're often heavier than the sensor wires, and also they connect, one of the wires connects directly to the burner, not through the ceramic box. So if we look at the resistance between my faulty burner leads, and you have to do this with the leads unhooked, or you should anyway, just to rule out other things. You might be able to do it with them hooked up, but I just don't recommend it. So I'm measuring the resistance here, and you can see OL on the meter. Hope that comes on the camera. That means overload or open circuit. So that means that there's no resistance between these two terminals. Well, if we flip it over, we can very clearly see a burnt mark where this lead that came in burnt the wire. It's missing, and so now there's no complete path for current to flow. So that's the problem with this burner, and we've concretely determined that this was a problem. In fact, I diagnosed it, took it out, and then I noticed the burnt part. Okay, so my new burner, let's see what it does for resistance. What it has for resistance here. All right. So I've measured it earlier. It's about 45, 46 ohms, and this is one of the smaller burners, so that's fine. The larger burners, the resistance will be lower because more current has to flow through it to generate a higher power. So these are anywhere from like 10 to 15, maybe 20 ohms for each of the coils in these larger burners. So this is our new, our properly working burner. So let's take the wires before we get too carried away and put them on the new burner. There they are. And you can see clearly that this is in better shape than the burnt one. All right, so the next thing we need to do is diagnose the sensor. And the sensor, when it's cold, should be open circuit. So let's see what we got here. Huh, it's not open circuit, it's a short. 0 ohms resistance between those two terminals. Well, that's certainly not the way it's supposed to be. Excuse me. Let me take my good sensor and measure it, and it's cold. Hey, overload, open circuit. So that sensor is good. So ironically for me, and I guess I seldom get lucky with these things, but this burner was bad and this sensor was bad, so replacing this one part will correct both problems. So let's get those wires back on. And, that's a little, oh, that one is okay. I got those in the wrong position. You definitely want to make sure that these little connectors are stiff going on. If they're loose and slide back and forth like that, take them with a pair of pliers and give them a little crimp to snug them up a bit. You're not trying to crush them, but you do want that on there tight. There we go. All right, so that's on there now. Okay, so now there's only one thing left to do, and that's to move these brackets over. Well, if you notice, there are numbers along here. There's a bracket that covers 63 and a bracket that covers 27. Unscrew from one. These are self-threading screws. And if you're careful when you put this on, you don't need to crank it too hard. But I'm not sure if the camera picked it up, but these holes are all numbered. And so I moved the bracket from over 63 to over 63. And then over 27 right there to over 27 on this one. And if you do this, the orientation for the wiring is correct and the sensor and all that stuff is good. If you do this wrong, well, your wires won't line up very well, for sure. And I'm going to remove this screw. Now careful you don't drop the screw down the side of the inside of the stove. I'm going to take this and slide it up in there like that. Okay, so we got it back in place. And finished installing this. I did lose one of these screws down here, and so I had to go get a spare. So be careful not to do that. And it's on there, and that's on there. Okay. So now you've got the new burner back in place. the new burner's installed. And just give it another once over before you put things back together. All the connections are still on there nice and snug. And if you did any disconnecting of wires for diagnosis of other burners, which I did, I still have some disconnected up here that I'm going to put back on, there and there. Then it's a installation reverse of disassembly. Take this out, fold it down, slide it in, and put the screws in from under there. And that's the end of the repair. If you like my videos, please subscribe.